Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure today to welcome Cristiana Santos from University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. She will be speaking about paywalls and cookies and RGPD. And just a word to remind you that the Forum Numerica is the seminar series from the Academy of Excellence Needs, Network, Information, and Digital Society. And we are on the process of planning the seminars for this year. And so the suggestion from any parts are welcome. So please get back to us if you want to program some seminars. So I leave the floor to Cristiana.
Thank you for the introduction. So Santos, maybe some of you have seen me over lunch or walking around with Natalia, and maybe even before, since 2019, right? So I'm a legal scholar and I have a law degree and I was a lawyer by training. I'm today an assistant professor at the School of Law at Utrecht University, and I hold an INRIA chair of a starting career position until 2026. So you will be seeing me for the next years. And it would be also nice to meet you after this talk and later on. Within this starting career position chair, we will continue to work on our patterns, on tracking technologies, discovering new practices of tracking technologies, and reporting also non-compliant practices, and studying manipulative dark patterns as well. My main interests are GDPR and e-privacy directive as the core legislation, and to filter potentially non-compliance practices in the light of this legislation. And also any sort of manipulative practices that apps, websites use. These are some examples of our work. So we publish together in legal venues, like the top one, Harvard Journal of Law and Technology, Annual Privacy Forum, but we also publish in design venues like CAI, and also on technical venues like SNP. So since 2020, actually a little bit before, but this is an example of how far we have been working so far. I'm not presenting a work that we have jointly researched upon, but another one on cookie paywalls. Have you ever heard before of this talk of cookie paywalls at all? You too? No? Yes? Can you give me an example?
Well, on many websites, when you want to just visit a website, I usually just do not accept any cookie, and some of the websites, they suggest that I should probably pay.
Do you remember any websites? You have anything in mind? Allociné, okay. I have a good example to showcase. And then, any other on top of your mind? You know.
Yeah, I was going to say
some newspapers, exactly. Yes. So normally we are used to, every time we navigate the web, to see a cookie banner, right? Because it's a legal requirement that websites have to request our consent for tracking technologies. It's a e-privacy directive that says so. But paywalls are a little bit of a new business model and a sophisticated roadblock to navigate the web. So let's see a concrete example. Ta-da! So Allociné here. What do you see in the first place? To access the website, we need to pay, right? €2. And we need to subscribe it, to pay it within 1 month, or we have an alternative to tracking, to give to our request for consent, right? So what are these two choices within a website? Either we accept consent and access the website, and so we are tracked. Actually, I should know how users are tracked on this website, but I will see it after our talk, or you can see now while you are there on your side. Or in order to avoid tracking and to assure your privacy, you pay and you have a subscription. Interestingly, this is €2. So this is a choice that you have. Another website for news instead of the ones that prefer news instead of movies. HuffPost provides us exactly the same choice. Either we consent to be tracked, either if we refuse, we can actually subscribe a paywall. And this is also €2 without tracking. And that is a premise, right? So this was actually what brought us to analyze this phenomenon of paywalls quite recently. So last year, we worked together with some computer scientists to analyze the scale of paywalls, which type of paywalls exist, and the lawfulness of paywalls. So far, back then, 1 year ago, so we published in the workshop for Privacy in the Electronic Society workshop, there was only one, when we start working together, one decision of the Austrian DPA allowing paywalls. And then some months later, the French Data Protection Authority, DPA, a regulator, actually, you know, the CNIL here, in France, brought up some guidelines for the French data protection actors, users, websites, etc., providing also some guidelines. So we have in Austria, the regulator saying yes, and in France, some interesting position that we will see. And so this was the background motivation for us to act upon paywalls. Back then, there was only one paper related to paywalls, but a little bit generic. So Papadopoulos et al., they wanted to analyze, to automatically detect paywalls and classify them using machine learning. They were not only focused on cookie paywalls like us, but only paywalls without any tracking associated, just registration walls. And they realized that visitors are not tracked if they pay. And they reviewed the types of websites deploying such paywalls. So this was the only study that we could build upon. So our work mostly focused on 13 Central European websites. So all of these websites, mostly related to Austria because of the Austrian position regarding their, how to say, positive position regarding paywalls, okay? The only one back then. And so we built upon the list from Tranco. We analyzed 2,800 websites, and we analyzed the data, the types of paywalls, what are the prices, what were the subscription types per month, per week, etc., whether they had a cookie wall or a paywall, etc. And so first result, we understood the types of paywalls that exist. One is a hard paywall, the one that we have actually seen at the very beginning, Le Monde as well, Allocine, and Le Voici as well. So you need to pay to access a website. This is what it is called, the hard paywall. You cannot even access the contents of the website without paying, right? But then there are other types of paywalls. A soft paywall, I don't have a concrete example, but I can tell you that this is also a possibility. It presents some content. So, for example, 2 or 3 news, or access to 1 or 2 web sub-pages, nothing else. I was looking for, but I did not find one. Which one? Nismata. I should have looked better, but so gives us access a little bit to some content to trigger your interest, but no longer. So this is a soft paywall, which is still a paywall. If you want to go further and use it on a more recurrent basis, we need to pay. And then we have a metered paywall, which is more or less the same as a soft paywall, but is time bounded. So we saw that some, I cannot give you the examples back then because they changed their business model meanwhile. They changed. So in the beginning, some could provide 5 minutes of access to the website, and then a pop-up was appearing to us saying, you now need to register. We have given you the perfect amount of time to decide if you want to continue with us or not, and then a pop-up inviting to subscribe with a fee. There are also cookie paywalls, the ones that we are most interested in, giving this choice. Either you pay and you are not tracked, either you consent to tracking, a cookie wall and a registration wall, regardless of paying. And these were the ones that were mostly interested in. So what is the scale of these paywalls in general? Only 61 or out of 2,800 websites. Looks little, right? And only 13 out of the 61 use cookie paywalls, also very little, right? So it seems that the prevalence is not something to regard at this stage. And most websites related to news, also not very new. And so we were wondering, are paywalls a streamlined practice or not? Well, it does not seem so, but this we cannot ignore or take this conclusion that they are not scalable or not that representative, because our data set for this work was quite limited. And also, we were very limited with our manual analysis. Why so? Because I will say, indeed, the appearance of a paywall can depend on multiple factors, like the IP address, the operating system, the use of a browser. So we need to understand that we cannot take a conclusion regarding the number of cookie paywalls that appeared. And maybe using multiple crawlers in a large-scale analysis would provide a more reliable result. And that motivated us to continue to work on paywalls until today. So what did we understand? That websites present different versions of cookie paywalls at the same time, depending on browsers, operating systems, and IP address. So the same website, then in ski, using the same operator and the same IP address, rendered two different types of paywalls. One, a cookie wall using Chrome, but using Firefox, it just appeared a soft paywall. So is this random, or is just some sort of personalized pricing? What is the difference? Why a soft paywall, and why only no payment on this regard? What is the difference? Just using a different browser. So we understood there are real-time discrepancies at the same time. And why, we don't know. Is it random? Is it some sort of personalized pricing? We don't understand that so far. But this appears and might create some sort of discrepancies and maybe discrimination as well, because there is an element of price here. Natalia, you are noting some curiosity here. You think there is some personalization or some randomness here?
One needs to do more experiments to find out if it depends on the browser, or it's randomized, or it's some kind of A/B testing that the website is doing.
We don't know yet, and we saw that this disparity is quite latent. It is when we were preparing the slides to present at the workshop, we were checking again if as that day of the presentation it was a paywall, if it was a cookie wall, and what type of cookie paywall was, and we saw variations of what is happening at the real time, such mismatches. Then, besides this interesting aspect that we wanted to regulators to reflect upon and also to test. We also were curious about the prices, right? And look at this table here. So this table renders the prices per month and per year. And if you see this table, most subscription models rely on per month, right? And only very few per week, only 2 per week or 3 per week, right? And the prices range from 2.99 per month to 6.25 per month, right? Spiegel is €5 per month. It's an interesting one. So let's see an example. Their standard per year costs €75 to avoid the tracking, right? Over the year. But it would require, okay, this is a little bit of a flash title. It would require around €728 using all these websites to avoid the tracking, right? And so are they pricey or not? What do you think? How many websites do you actually use for as a registered user, paying at all? 2, you use 2. Are any of those here? No, these are German ones. Or Austrian ones, okay. In you use in general, pay or track, not a wall, a subscription wall per se, but a choice between being you pay to avoid tracking. Any of you? Okay. Would you pay at all not to be tracked? You would pay. And if you would pay, would it be around €5 a month, €3 a month? Why am I asking? Not just for curiosity, but to understand the user's perceptions regarding paywalls, cookie paywalls. How much is a user willing to pay? Would the user actually pay at all? And if you would pay per week, per month, per year? If it would register, how much data would the user need to give? Would it be disproportional? And if would it be easy to unsubscribe, to stop paying, as it is easy to subscribe? So there are many questions that appeared, and so it is important to understand the user at stake here, right? Interestingly, you see Spiegel here, €5 a month, right? It's okay. Maybe users would pay for €5 a month. The problem is that our colleague, this is not a result of our study, but a colleague, I don't know if you know, Wolfie Crystal, is a privacy advocate, very strongly connected to reporting hot cases to media and doing it by himself very intensive research. And he said, and he analyzed that, for example, Spiegel, to which you would pay how much? €5 per month not to be tracked. Actually, users are being tracked by interesting firms, data brokers, and ad tech vendors like Facebook, like LifeRamp, like Pragmatic, involved also in real-time bidding. And this is a big contradiction, right? Because in principle, a user would pay to this website not to be tracked. But let's continue. We did not detect tracking prior to consent. And now finally, and in my favorite part, the compliance or non-compliance of paywalls. Okay, just a nice, an intuition. Are paywalls legitimate or not? Let's see, your intuitions. Are they legal? Raise your arm. Illegal? Okay, we have four illegal. And I don't know, and I don't want to make comments. Okay, so let's see what the legal domain has to offer here, or not, or it just adds confusion. So before that, I want to introduce you our favorite legal documents that you might be already acquainted to. The GDPR, that applies to personal data and has direct application in all countries in the EU. And the Privacy Directive that applies to information that is stored, received within our users in the terminal of in our terminals, laptop, whatever. And regardless of whether there is personal data or not being processed or shared. And the GDPR defines the conditions for consent to be valid. So that is why we always need to talk about the GDPR whenever websites compliance comes to the place, but also the Privacy Directive that says that consent needs to be asked before tracking occurs, right? These two legal bases. That's why at the beginning I say that in cookie banners are a result, an industry application of these legal requirements, right? So, and another particularity is that normally consent will always be needed for advertising purposes. And advertising, we know, is not necessary for the website to function, right? So in legal terms, it is not a strictly necessary functionality for a website to function, right? So for advertising purposes, its consent will always be required. Article 4 and Article 7 defines the conditions for consent to be valid, and there are many. But, yes.
How do you define the strict necessity? Because, for example, imagine that I consume content from somewhere else and then I buy it to some other provider. Then it's necessary for me to provide the website. So how do you...
Yeah, this is a very good question. We always need to understand what is the purpose for a functionality, what the purpose of your processing. So if the purpose is strictly necessary from the perspective of the user, not of the perspective of the website. For example, a banking service. In principle, what is for me to log in to access my banking functionalities? My data is going to be processed immediately, right? But it's from a service that I, Cristiana, requested to authenticate myself. And so authentication functionality is an important and strictly necessary functionality. So I don't know about your concrete purpose here. So cookies for authentication will be strictly necessary. Advertising will not be strictly necessary, and so they are not exempted of consent. So tell me again about the purpose that we can analyze together, the purpose that you mentioned for processing data. A website needs...
No, I was not thinking of purpose.
But the purpose is the key to assess...
Someone that say, okay, I consume the content from someone else, and then this someone else to be able to have access to it. Then I need to do something. No, it's not the technical need, but...
So we need to analyze the purpose from the perspective of the user. Did the user request a concrete service that the website renders? Okay. That not the purpose of the website per se, of a third party at all. So that is why it is so important to understand what are the purposes for processing personal data. And on that topic, we have studied a lot from a legal and from a technical perspective, the strict necessity of data controllers or the responsibles for processing personal data, websites, apps, and the need or the no need for consent or other legal basis when consent does not apply to. So what is the idea to retain from this website, from this slide? That consent, the legal basis for consent for processing personal data, is the ground to for websites that use paywalls to legitimize the processing of personal data for advertising purposes. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, a little bit of more legalese. According to the GDPR and from other legal sources, guidelines from data protection authorities, guidelines from the European Data Protection Board, which aggregates all data protection authorities in Europe. So, for example, the CNIL is also part of here. And decisions of the European Court of Justice, which is the top level court in Europe, where their decisions are binding, they are, how to say, very authoritative. We came up with a list of the legal requirements for consent. And we have we wrote a long paper, a legal and technical paper on this regard. But for our purposes, the most important requirement is freely given. Consent needs to be free from the user side. The users need to provide a voluntary choice to either accept or either reject tracking, to say yes and to say no, right? Free from any other pressure. How do we decompose a little bit what is freely given applied to tracking? Well, Article 411 says that consent needs to be freely given without any sort of consequences. What are those consequences? Is paying included? We don't know. It's not explicitly stated anywhere. So, recital of 25 of the Privacy Directive says that access to functionalities cannot be made dependent on consent if they are not necessary. What is not necessary? For example, advertising, right? So access to a website cannot be dependent on advertising for the website to function. Say it in another way. The EDPB guidelines on consent, guidelines, not law, and not decisions with the value of case law, of a precedent. They say that consent should be given with no pressure, without significant negative consequences like extra costs, but no reference to paywalls, to cookie paywalls. Data protection authorities all agree that users need to provide a choice to actually reject non-necessary cookies, non-necessary tracking technologies, but no explicit reference that applies to paywalls. We just need to interpret what the law says and applies to in this context. By the way, do you know how many data protection authorities exist in Europe? Around 28, but only 4 refer to paywalls in concrete. So there's a big space of interpretation. And these are the German DPA, Data Protection Authority, the Spanish one, very recent guidelines from this year, a couple of months ago, the French CNIL, here you are, and the Austrian one. Interestingly, we started with the Austrian Data Protection Authority, do you remember? That says yes to paywalls. Well, now it's not very clear. Even if the guidelines say yes, there was a recent decision of a court that says no. So it's a little bit, it says paywalls are generally permissible, but users must have the possibility to say yes or no to any specific data processing. What does it mean? We don't know very well how to interpret this, but this is what we have to pay, right? And it's a decision, so it has an authoritative value like a precedent. In Austria, right? So there is this dual position. Users need to be free to say yes and no. And the paywalls are permissible. The German DPA says that paywalls are not okay, do not respect a valid consent, do not respect a freely given consent from the user. Then we have the Spanish one. Guidelines state that access cannot be conditioned to consent to cookies. Okay, this is the character of a freely given consent. But exceptions can be made if alternatives are offered, alternatives like cookie paywalls. And these alternatives can consist of not necessarily free ones, so explicitly mentioning cookie paywalls, if users are informed of that. So cookie paywalls are okay. And then we have the French case, which is the most interesting one. It does not prohibit explicitly cookie paywalls. Actually, the French DPA says that cookie paywalls can be permissible in a case-by-case analysis. Okay? This is a little bit complicated to make a large-scale automatic measurement of cookie paywalls that could be legitimate or not. So the French DPA says that websites that use cookie paywalls need to check certain evaluative criteria. A fair remuneration, so a fair remuneration for the website themselves, a reasonable price. Is €3.50 reasonable? Is €5 reasonable? I don't know. And without tracking, obviously, right? Because it needs to be a valid alternative for consent, vale? So these are the positions to understand whether cookie paywalls are valid or not. What do you think about this scenario? Some case by case, others dual position, Spanish yes, German no. What do you think this? You were expecting a yes and no answer, right? Is this a nice environment for us lawyers and to assess the compliance and for you to detect what is legal and not legal? It's not a nice scenario, right? But this is what the law says. As Natalia was saying, sometimes it depends. So these divergent positions from several regulators do not provide a nice and harmonious, equilibrated level playing field. Right? So it's what are the signals for industry? Very confusing. It seems that in countries, yes, and in other countries, no. And so industry is taking advantage of this very dubious position and very, how to say, dual positions regarding cookie paywalls. So a lot of legal uncertainty, especially in France, where the cookie paywalls are coming up. So let us analyze in concrete what the French DPA, the CNIL, is saying regarding alternatives. It needs to be a real and fair alternative to cookie paywalls. Vale? Paywalls must be reasonable price. Paywalls need to be limited to a fair remuneration. And also, subscriptions must be accessible on different terminals. It's okay. Any doubts from this regard? Yes. It means that I think, I would like to ask the CNIL the same thing. I think that if users refuse tracking, there should be an alternative without tracking. It does not need to entail paying a fee, or it does not need to entail I don't know what is a real and fair alternative, and I would like to know. Any ideas what this means? There are concepts that I don't understand from a legal perspective. So paywalls, yes, if there is an alternative to tracking. So it's kind of a loop, right? Then, what is reasonable price? Is the price that we have understood from Spiegel and from their standard reasonable? I don't know. What do you think? Are they reasonable or not? Would you pay for that? We need user studies to confirm this sort of, to say, perceptions from users. So the CNIL actually provided guidelines without testing it or without explaining what it means. What is a fair remuneration as well? So our regulator here in France is not very clear. And to add more to the legal complexity, the highest court in Europe, the Court of Justice of the EU, very recently in July brought up a decision. And in this decision, it emerged in paragraph 150, this paragraph, this allusion to paywalls. And I give you 1 minute for you to read. Maybe you can help me to interpret this paragraph, because I have doubts about it. So let me help to decompose a little bit, if I can. Users must be free to refuse their consent without being obliged to refrain from using the service. Very nice. Really, the spirit of the requirement of a freely given consent. But it means that it is possible that users can be offered, if necessary, for an appropriate fee, right? An equivalent, an alternative service. So it kind of legitimizes cookie paywalls. If these cookie paywalls are necessary, when are they necessary? And for an appropriate fee. So help me, please, because I'm in the hands of regulators that say yes and no with a fair remuneration, with a reasonable price. And then the highest court in the Court of Europe says this. So I'm very confused. When is it necessary? For the purposes of the website, for its sustainability, for its economical model? What is a reasonable price? So it's a mess. And besides that, there are no guidelines regarding the type of data that is collected from websites. There is no information regarding the retention period. Until when can they retain the data or not? And also potentially the type of websites that can use or not paywalls could, for example, public websites, hospitals, city halls, could they use cookie paywalls? Is it legitimate for them? So news, for example, which is most predominant category of websites that use cookie paywalls, can reveal a lot of sensitive data, right? And this is very preoccupying. But the regulators, neither the Court of Justice, say anything about that. So I wanted to provide you some answers, but I gave you more questions than answers, right? But to give you the status quo of the paywalls. There is not much time, but I would like to give you a pinch, if you are interested, of our very recent study. Are you okay, or this is enough? I put the decision in your hands. Are you sleeping already? Too much legalese? Too much legal problems? Okay. So this year, still beaten from this cookie paywalls topic and from this climate of legal uncertainty, we've studied again cookie paywalls, but from the perspective of the IAB-TCF, IAB Europe TCF. Do you know what is this? Have you ever heard of it? So IAB-TCF, IAB Europe TCF, is actually an ad industry body representing several organizations connected to the advertising industry. It has its headquarters in Brussels. And it provided a transparency and consent framework used by more than 1,000 websites in Europe. And it is responsible for standardizing consent. So most of the cookie banners that you see when you visit the web, most are triggered by this framework. Why? Because it standardizes the way for websites to collect consent through actors that emerged through this framework, consent management platforms, or CMPs in short. They all collect consent, the user preferences from the users, which purposes, which legal basis, that are provided by this framework. Why the TCF? Why we chose the TCF? Well, because we understood that in the previous study, most of the cookie paywalls that appeared were based on the TCF. So I don't want to provide a lot of confusion here. I just wanted to show you the most recent results that we got from months ago. If you are interested in the methodology and more items on this paper, I will tell you. Paywalls were most prevalent in Germany and in France. Germany, let me give you my highlights here. Germany, it got 317 cookie paywalls. And this is very interesting because we have just seen 5 minutes ago that Germany is not at all in line with paywalls, with cookie paywalls, right? So there's a bit of an issue here. They are prevalent, but they do not accord to the DPA, to the regulator. Or so it's a bit of a discrepancy here. So 431 of the cookie paywalls detected all use the TCF, the IAB, Transparency and Consent Framework. Interestingly, this framework is being scrutinized also by the Court of Justice, the ultimate court, by its unlawfulness. Last week, there were the hearings in the court. So actually, most of cookie paywalls are being used by this advertising body that is actually very dubious from a legal perspective. I'm finishing, give me just 1 or 2, 3 minutes. Paywall website categories, they are spread not only from news, as our previous study from last year, but so news still very prevalent, you see, but now they proliferate to business, tech, and entertainment websites. Interesting, right? Why? We don't know, but it's gaining a lot of traction in other sectors. Business, computers and technology, and entertainment. And the prices. Well, we don't have much news on this regard. 3.34, it does not look very pricey, right? But the issue is that this result is not very, how to say, we don't know still what is a fair remuneration. We don't know that. We don't know what is a reasonable price for websites themselves. So maybe this is in line with what the French Data Protection Authority says. We don't know. The problem is that users continue to accept tracking. And this is being referred by a user study from our colleagues in Frankfurt that provided the only results regarding a user study on cookie paywalls. It seems that users indeed consent to tracking 99% of the times. And so paywalls are have a reasonable price, but nevertheless, users prefer to say okay to tracking. And concluding the last slide regarding the relationship between cookie paywalls and the TCF. cookie paywalls are being used, right? And even if the users pay, they are still being tracked. So this is the last conclusion that I wanted to give. So users actually pay not to be tracked, they are still being tracked. I don't want to go through more legal issues, but if you are curious, please get in touch with us and we will be very happy to convey the results. So conclusion, from a legal perspective, for sure, we need a little bit of more legal certainty, right? Because there are many actors that are relevant to the scenario, the French regulator, the German, the Austrian, they provide very different positions. Decisions might not be enough. Look, the case of Germany, right? There was a decision that forbade it, but they are still prevalent. Technically, we need a large-scale analysis and automated tracking detection. And we need user studies to understand what are the users saying all about this. With more questions, more granular questions, rather than, yes, users continue to say yes to tracking.